The call dropped right after he said, "She doesn't work here anymore," and I knew right then that my money was gone. Not misplaced, not delayed. Gone. I stood on the sidewalk outside the office building my cousin swore was temporary space, phone pressed to my ear like I could squeeze the truth back through it, watching strangers stream past me with their coffees and briefcases and certainty. $40,000. My savings, my safety, my future. I felt my knees soften, but I didn't fall. I couldn't afford to. I'd believed her because belief was our language. We grew up sharing plates at cookouts, whispering secrets under blankets, promising we'd make it out together. When she came to me with charts and projections and that smile that always meant she'd done her homework, I listened. "It's family-backed," she said. "Low risk, high return." I heard opportunity. I heard trust. I didn't hear the warning bells because love can be loud like that. Weeks after I transferred the money, she kept me busy with updates. Permits pending, vendors delayed, investors circling. I told myself patience was part of adulthood. Then updates slowed, then stopped. My texts went from blue to green. Calls rang out. When I finally tracked down the listed office, the receptionist looked at me with practiced confusion and said my cousin's name like she was tasting something unfamiliar. She hasn't been here in months. I walked home in a fog, replaying every conversation, every promise. Rent was due in 5 days. My car payment was already late. I opened my banking app like it might apologize. It didn't. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall until the light changed. Shame crept in, slick and quiet, telling me I should have known better, telling me I'd been greedy, naive. I swallowed it, because shame is easier than rage when you're scared. The eviction notice came faster than the replies I never got. Bright paper, heavy words. I packed what I could, sold what I couldn't carry, and slept the first night in my car behind a grocery store where the lights stayed on. I learned the sound of engines idling too long. I learned how to make myself small. I learned which parking garages felt safer at dawn. Hunger became a schedule. Pride became a rule. I stopped answering calls. Friends asked questions I didn't have answers for. Family whispered. I couldn't bear the looks, the pity mixed with judgment. At night, I cried into my jacket so no one would hear me break. But something stubborn stayed alive, a spark that said, "Not like this, not unnamed, not uncounted." So I started documenting screenshots, transfers, messages, dates. I built timelines under flickering lights, the glow of my phone illuminating my hands as they steadied. I read about fraud and consumer law until my eyes burned. I learned the language they use to make theft sound legal. I learned how silence works and how to break it. One night, parked between white lines that weren't mine, I opened a blank page and wrote the truth, not for sympathy, for record. My fingers hovered, then moved. I didn't know who would see it. I only knew I couldn't disappear with my money. By morning, my phone was buzzing, and the first message changed everything. My phone vibrated against the center console like it was alive, buzzing again and again until I finally grabbed it with shaking hands. Notifications stacked on the screen, comments, messages, shares from the post I'd written sometime after midnight, sitting in my car with the engine off and my breath fogging the windshield. I hadn't expected anyone to really see it. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere outside my chest. But now strangers were reading my life like it was their own reflection. Thank you for saying this. This happened to me too. I thought I was the only one. I read every word slowly, my throat tightening with each one. Women from all over were telling their stories in fragments. Sisters, cousins, partners, friends, people they trusted who had wrapped theft in love and sold it as opportunity. The shame I'd been carrying alone suddenly felt shared, and that changed its weight. It didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. Still, none of that paid rent. None of it put gas in my tank. Reality didn't pause for validation. By midday, the security guard at the grocery store started watching my car a little too closely. I knew the look, measuring how long I'd been there, deciding whether I belonged. I drove off before he could knock, heart pounding like I'd done something wrong. I hadn't, but homelessness teaches you how quickly innocence can look like guilt. I spent the afternoon at the library, charging my phone and my spirit in equal measure. I printed bank statements, highlighted transactions, built a timeline that showed exactly when the money left and when my cousin stopped responding. Seeing it laid out like that, clean, factual, steadied me. This wasn't just a bad decision, it was deception, fraud, and it had a name. I called a legal aid number I'd found buried in a forum thread, left a voicemail, careful and concise, like I was pitching my own survival. Then I waited, again. That night, I parked in a gym garage where the lights stayed on and the security cameras faced the right direction. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom sink like I was just another late-night workout person. I slept sitting up, keys looped around my finger, dreams shallow and jittery. In one, my cousin smiled at me across a table covered in papers I couldn't read. The next morning, my voicemail light blinked. Legal aid had called back. The woman on the line spoke slowly, kindly, but didn't sugarcoat it. Family fraud cases were complicated. Proof mattered. Patience mattered. Outcomes weren't guaranteed. I told her I understood. What I didn't say was that I didn't have the luxury of hope without action anymore. She gave me a checklist: police report, credit freeze, documentation. I wrote it all down, hands steady now. Purpose does that. It sharpens you. As the days passed, my post kept moving, shared by women with platforms I'd never imagined reaching. Podcasts asked if I'd talk. A local news producer emailed, careful not to sound predatory. I said no at first. Visibility felt dangerous. But then I thought about how quiet I'd been when this first happened, how that silence had almost swallowed me whole. I said yes to one interview, anonymous, voice only. After it aired, my inbox flooded, not just with stories, but with resources, lawyers, advocates, financial educators offering free materials. One woman sent me a gas card with a note that said, "So you don't have to choose between heat and hope." I cried in my car for a long time after reading that. But with the support came something else, a message from a number I hadn't seen in months. My cousin. 3 words lit up my screen. "You need to stop." I stared at the message, my pulse loud in my ears. For the first time since everything fell apart, fear and clarity collided at the same moment, because I knew then I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was threatening hers. The message sat there glowing like a warning flare. You need to stop. No hello. No explanation, just command. My hands went cold, then hot, then steady. I didn't reply. Silence had taught me things, and one of them was this: people only try to shut you up when your words are working. I took screenshots immediately. Timestamp, number, saved it to the folder I'd labeled with her name. Documentation had become muscle memory. Fear still flickered, but it didn't run the show anymore. I'd slept in my car. I'd lost my home. Whatever threat she thought that text carried, it was already too late. Another message followed an hour later, longer this time. She said I was lying, said I was exaggerating, said I was ruining her reputation over a failed investment. Failed, like the money had tripped and fallen on its own. I felt the old urge rise, to explain, to soften the truth so it wouldn't hurt anyone else. I let it pass. I'd already done enough shrinking for one lifetime. I filed a police report the next morning. The officer listened, nodded, asked questions that cut straight through the emotion: dates, amounts, communications. When I slid my folder across the desk, his eyebrows lifted just slightly. That reaction mattered. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant this wasn't just family drama. Afterward, I sat in my car with the engine running, hands on the wheel, breathing through the adrenaline. Filing that report felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but it also felt like oxygen. Truth has that effect when you've been holding it too long. The backlash came quickly. Mutual relatives started posting vague messages about airing dirty laundry and seeking attention. One aunt called and asked why I was being so dramatic. I asked her why $40,000 wasn't dramatic enough. She didn't answer. The line went quiet. I hung up and added her call to the list of things I didn't owe explanations for anymore. Money was still tight. Some nights I ate crackers and peanut butter and told myself it was temporary. Other nights I wasn't so convincing. I showered at the gym, learned which hours were least crowded, perfected the art of looking fine when I wasn't. Homelessness is invisible until it isn't, and I worked hard to stay on the invisible side. The online support didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Women sent long messages detailing how scams had been normalized in their families, how love had been weaponized against them. I started responding, not as a victim, but as someone mapping a way forward. I shared resources, steps, warnings. My voice stopped shaking when I typed. A nonprofit director reached out, asked if I'd consider speaking to a small group. No cameras, no headlines, just women. I hesitated, then agreed. Sitting in that circle, telling my story out loud, I felt something shift. Power doesn't always arrive as confidence. Sometimes it arrives as relief. That night, parked under a flickering streetlight, I checked my email and saw a subject line that made my chest tighten: cease and desist. My cousin's lawyer. Official letterhead, legal language meant to intimidate. I read it slowly, then forwarded it to legal aid. Documentation, always. I lay back in the driver's seat, staring up at the concrete ceiling of the garage, heart thudding but steady. She wanted me quiet. She wanted me afraid. What she didn't understand was that she'd already taken everything else. My will was the one thing she couldn't touch, and tomorrow I was scheduled to go live. I sat in the driver's seat 15 minutes before the live was scheduled to start. Phone propped against the dashboard, palms damp, heartbeat loud enough to feel in my throat. The garage smelled like oil and damp concrete. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like they were nervous too. I almost canceled. Almost told myself it was safer to stay quiet, to survive privately. But quiet was how this had swallowed me in the first place. I pressed go live. At first, it was just me and the sound of my own breathing. Then faces appeared, names, comments rolling faster than I could read. We can hear you. Take your time. You're safe here. That word, safe, hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed and started from the beginning. Not polished, not dramatic, just the truth. How family trust blurred my vision, how paperwork and promises replaced contracts, how $40,000 disappeared, and with it, the life I'd built. I talked about sleeping in my car, about the way shame makes you disappear before hunger ever does, about documenting everything because it was the only way to stay sane. My voice cracked once. I didn't apologize for it. I let the silence breathe, then kept going. The comments poured in, women sharing their own warnings, their own red flags ignored, their own money lost to someone they loved. The live stretched from 15 minutes to an hour without me noticing. When I finally ended it, my phone was hot to the touch, and my chest felt lighter than it had in months. The email came an hour later, another one, and another. A journalist, a consumer protection advocate, a law clinic offering pro bono support. I didn't respond to everything. I couldn't. But I cataloged it all, the same way I cataloged pain, carefully, deliberately, without letting it overwhelm me. My cousin's reaction was swift. Missed calls, voicemails layered with anger and panic. She accused me of ruining her life, said she'd trusted me not to embarrass her. I listened once, saved the audio, and blocked the number. Boundaries aren't cruel. They're necessary. Legal aid confirmed what I suspected. The cease and desist had no teeth. It was intimidation dressed as authority. Knowing that shifted something fundamental in me. Fear relies on ignorance. Knowledge turns the lights on. The nights were still long. I still slept in my car, still counted dollars, still navigated spaces where I didn't quite belong. But now I wasn't alone inside my head. Purpose had moved in, rearranged the furniture, told despair it could no longer stay. A woman from the live sent me a message that stuck. Your story made me pull my money back before it was too late. I stared at that line for a long time. Saving myself was one thing. Saving someone else without even trying, that was something else entirely. I started drafting a checklist, red flags, questions to ask, steps to verify before investing with anyone, especially family. I shared it. It spread. People asked for more, workshops, resources, a name for what I was doing. I didn't have a name yet. I just knew this wasn't accidental anymore. This was becoming work. Late that night, as I reclined the seat and pulled my jacket tighter around me, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop and my spine straighten at the same time. A court summons. My name at the top, and hers underneath it. I read the summons 3 times before it settled into my bones. Plaintiff and defendant. Legal language, clean and cold, like it didn't care that the names on the page had shared birthdays and inside jokes once. My cousin had filed first, accusing me of defamation, harassment, malicious intent. I laughed once, sharp and humorless, then felt the weight of it press down. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. I drove to the library at dawn, summons folded in my jacket pocket like a secret I couldn't put down. I printed everything, again. Timelines, screenshots, wire transfers, emails where she promised return she never delivered. I added the cease and desist letter to the pile, then the voicemail transcripts. I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. That mattered. Legal aid called me back before noon. Calm voice, direct questions. She explained strategy like she was mapping a route through unfamiliar terrain. You did the right thing documenting, she said. Truth is your defense. I wrote that down and underlined it twice. Truth had already cost me comfort. I wasn't about to let it cost me clarity, too. The parking garage nights grew colder. I learned how to layer clothes for warmth without looking like I was wearing my life on my body. I kept my car clean, my hair neat, my voice steady when I spoke to anyone official. Appearances shouldn't matter, but they do when you're trying to be believed. I hated that lesson. I learned it anyway. I went to court alone the first time. No entourage, no speeches, just me, my folder, and a spine that had learned how to straighten itself. Seeing her across the room was stranger than I expected, smaller, tighter. Her eyes slid past me like I was a wall she didn't want to acknowledge. When the judge spoke, the room quieted in that way that makes your heart loud. Dates were set, motions scheduled, nothing resolved, everything real. Outside, my phone buzzed with notifications from the post I'd shared the night before. More women, more stories. One message stopped me cold. She tried to get me too. The sender included screenshots. Same pitch, same language, same promises. My breath caught. Patterns don't lie. I forwarded the message to legal aid and saved a copy in a new folder labeled Others. I started sleeping less, thinking more, not spiraling, strategizing. I drafted a simple website with free resources, no donations, no ads, just information. I didn't want anyone to think I was doing this for money. I'd lost enough of it to know better. The stress showed up anyway. Headaches, jaw clenched tight, moments where the old shame tried to sneak back in wearing a different coat. I countered it with routine, library hours, gym showers, phone check-ins with one friend who knew the whole truth. I stopped hiding. Hiding had never protected me. The night before my response was due, I sat in my car under a streetlight and recorded a video I didn't plan to post. Just me, speaking plainly about what accountability looks like when family is involved, about how love doesn't mean access, about how silence is not the same as peace. I saved it, unsure. Then an email arrived from a national nonprofit focused on consumer protection. Subject line, "We've been following your story." They wanted to talk about collaboration, education, reach. My hands trembled not with fear, but with the gravity of it. This had grown bigger than me. I looked at the court papers again, then at the messages from women I'd never met who were safer because I spoke. Two paths stretched out in front of me, one narrow and defensive, one wide and demanding. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder I'd set weeks ago back when I was just trying to survive. Decision day. And I knew whatever I chose next would decide not just the case, but the shape of my life after it. Decision day didn't come with a clock chime or dramatic music. It arrived quietly, like most turning points do, while I was sitting in my car outside the library watching the flag above the building twitch in the morning wind. I reread the email from the nonprofit 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because understanding it meant accepting responsibility for something bigger than survival. They wanted to partner, not feature me, not exploit my story, partner. Workshops, educational materials, a pilot program for women vulnerable to family-based scams. My story wouldn't be the headline, it would be the foundation. That distinction mattered. At the same time, Legal Aid sent me a draft response to my cousin's lawsuit. Firm, factual, unemotional. Reading it felt like watching a version of myself I was still becoming, clear-eyed, unflinching, unwilling to be bullied back into silence. I signed it digitally from the front seat of my car, hands steady, shoulders relaxed. I didn't feel brave. I felt aligned. Court dates stacked up, motions filed. Her legal team pushed hard, trying to frame me as reckless, unstable, attention-seeking. It stung less than I expected. Once you slept in your car, accusations lose some of their power. I showed up prepared every time, folders thicker, voice quieter, confidence earned. The nights were still hard, cold, lonely. Some evenings the parking garage echoed too much and I moved on before fear could settle. Other nights I stayed put and studied fraud case precedents, consumer protection statutes, the mechanics of accountability. Knowledge stopped being a coping mechanism and became a tool. I started explaining things to other women in plain language, translating legal jargon into something usable. They listened. They asked questions. I answered. The nonprofit invited me to a virtual planning meeting. Seeing my face in that grid, clean shirt, neutral background, posture upright, felt surreal. Months earlier, I'd been trying not to cry under fluorescent lights. Now I was helping shape curriculum. The irony didn't escape me. Pain has a way of refining you if you don't let it rot. My cousin tried reaching out again through a different number. This time her tone was softer, regret mixed with resentment. She asked if I could tone it down, said the attention was hurting her. I didn't respond. Accountability often feels like harm to people who've never had to face it. Then something unexpected happened. A judge dismissed her defamation claim outright. Insufficient evidence, public interest protections. The ruling landed in my inbox like a quiet thunderclap. I sat there staring at the screen, breath caught halfway between laughter and tears. It wasn't victory, but it was protection. The nonprofit offered me a modest stipend for my time. I hesitated before accepting. Money had become complicated. Then I realized refusing compensation wouldn't make me noble, it would make me tired. I accepted, carefully, and used the first payment to put a deposit down on a small room. 4 walls, a lock, a place to exhale. The first night I slept there, I didn't set an alarm. My body woke up on its own. I recorded the video I'd saved weeks earlier and finally posted it. Not polished, not viral, just honest. The response was steady, grounding, less noise, more depth. That felt right. One evening, sitting on my bed with my notes spread around me, I realized I wasn't just reacting to betrayal anymore. I was building infrastructure, systems, safeguards, education. I was doing the things scams can't account for, turning harm into clarity. The court case wasn't over, restitution wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time since the money disappeared, I wasn't measuring my life by what I'd lost. I was measuring it by what I was creating. And the next hearing was circled in red on my calendar for a reason I knew would change everything. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of place where emotions are stripped down to facts, whether you're ready or not. I arrived early, folder tucked under my arm, wearing my calm like armor. This hearing wasn't about her defamation claim anymore. That door had closed. This was about the money, about whether the law would name what she did for what it was, or let it dissolve into bad judgment and family silence. She didn't look at me when she walked in, not once. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, confident, practiced. Mine nodded to me, quiet reassurance in her eyes. When the judge called the case, my chest tightened, not with fear, but with focus. I'd learned the difference. They tried to muddy the water, claimed the investment was informal, claimed there were risks I'd accepted, claimed I was sophisticated enough to know better. I listened without interrupting, hands folded, spine straight. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly, not emotionally, chronologically. Dates, transfers, messages promising guaranteed returns, silence after the money cleared. I watched the judge's pen pause more than once. That pause mattered. Then my lawyer introduced evidence I hadn't known we'd secured, subpoenaed records, a bank account opened in another state under a shell LLC, funded by my money, drained within weeks, travel expenses, personal purchases, no attempt at a business launch at all. The room shifted. You can feel it when the air changes in your favor. My cousin finally looked at me then, just for a second. Her eyes weren't angry, they were scared. I didn't feel triumph, I felt distance, like we were standing on opposite sides of something that couldn't be crossed back over. The judge didn't rule that day, he rarely did, but he ordered mediation and froze certain assets pending review, a legal pause, a breath held by the system itself. Outside, my lawyer squeezed my shoulder and said, "This is movement." I nodded. Movement was enough for now. Life didn't stop while the law took its time. The nonprofit launched the pilot workshops, and I facilitated the first one from a borrowed office with a borrowed desk and my own voice. Women showed up with notebooks and stories and the same tired hope I'd carried for months. We talked red flags, contracts, verification, boundaries. We talked about love and how it doesn't require blind trust. When it ended, nobody rushed out. They stayed, asked questions, took notes like their futures depended on it. Some of them did. I started getting emails from organizations in other states, requests to replicate the model, to train trainers, to build something scalable. I'd never used that word before. Now it sat comfortably in my mouth. I hired a part-time coordinator, filed paperwork to formalize the nonprofit, watched the mission take shape on paper and then in rooms filled with people. At night, alone in my small rented room, the old feelings still visited. Grief, anger, that ache for the cousin I thought I knew. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for the truth without letting it take over the house. I learned to sit with it, then let it pass. Mediation day arrived with less drama than I expected. A neutral room, water pitchers, tissues nobody used. My cousin's lawyer pushed for a settlement that felt insulting, partial repayment, no admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality clauses designed to silence me. I didn't counter. I declined. Calmly, clearly. My lawyer backed me up. The mediator raised an eyebrow like he wasn't used to that kind of certainty. Afterward, my cousin tried to speak to me in the hallway, said she was tired, said she wanted this to end. I told her it would end when accountability began. I wished her well. I meant it, and I walked away without looking back. That night, I checked my email one last time before sleep and saw a subject line that made my breath catch. Federal Inquiry. Request for information. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart steady, hands warm, understanding immediately what it meant. This was no longer just my fight, and tomorrow everything would get bigger. The federal email didn't ask questions the way people do when they're unsure. It asked them the way institutions do when they're already tracing lines you didn't know existed. Attachments, deadlines, secure portals, language precise enough to feel heavy. I sat there reading it over and over, the hum of the mini-fridge filling the silence, understanding that my cousin's scam had moved beyond family betrayal into something systemic, and that I had become a witness, not just a victim. I forwarded everything I had, again, bank records, messages, the Shell LLC, the cease and desist, the mediation notes. Each upload felt like placing another brick into a structure I hadn't set out to build, but now recognized as necessary. When I finished, I leaned back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, breath slow, heart steady. I wasn't afraid, I was ready. The next weeks moved in a strange rhythm, fast on paper, slow in feeling. Federal investigators called with calm voices and careful questions. They didn't rush me. They didn't doubt me. They asked me to clarify timelines, explain relationships, define trust. I realized how rarely anyone had asked me those questions without judgment attached. I answered honestly, even when it hurt, especially then. My cousin disappeared again. No texts, no hallway encounters. Her lawyer communicated through formal channels only, tone clipped, options narrowing. The mediation offer was officially withdrawn. The asset freeze expanded. The law had found its footing, and it didn't need my permission anymore. The nonprofit work deepened. We hosted workshops in 3 states in 1 month, virtual rooms filled with faces I'd never meet but felt connected to. Women took notes. Men listened quietly in the background. Some people cried. Others nodded like they were finally seeing a pattern they'd lived inside for years. I wasn't a speaker chasing applause. I was a translator, turning hard lessons into usable language. That felt right. Money stabilized, not abundance, but enough. Enough to pay rent on time, enough to keep the lights on without counting coins, enough to buy groceries without calculating hunger against gas. I learned to appreciate enough as its own kind of wealth. I kept my life simple, predictable, safe. Then the article dropped. A national outlet, carefully written, fact-checked, my name included with my consent, my cousin unnamed but unmistakable. The headline didn't sensationalize. It told the truth plainly, how family-based investment scams were rising, how shame kept victims silent, how one woman's documentation had helped open a federal inquiry. I read it once, then again. Then I closed the tab and went for a walk, needing to feel the world under my feet. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded. Support, gratitude, anger, fear. Donations poured into the nonprofit, not for me, but for the mission. I hired 2 more coordinators, built a board, filed for grants. Structure rose where survival used to live. Not everyone was kind. Anonymous messages accused me of betrayal, of greed, of destroying my own blood. I read them once, then deleted them. Blood doesn't excuse harm. Silence doesn't heal it. I'd learned that lesson thoroughly. Late one night, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. A quiet voice said my name and asked if I was safe. It was my cousin's former business partner, another woman who'd been promised returns, who'd lost her savings, who'd been too afraid to speak until now. She cried as she talked. I listened. Then I told her she wasn't alone anymore, and I meant it. The next morning, the investigators called to say they'd like me to testify formally, sworn statement, recorded, on the record. I said yes without hesitation. This wasn't escalation for the sake of revenge. This was closure built from truth. That night, I laid out my clothes for the testimony. Simple, neutral, steady. I practiced my breathing, not to calm nerves, but to honor the moment. I thought about the woman I'd been sleeping in her car, whispering promises to herself in the dark. I wished I could tell her how far she'd come. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed one more time, a message from a woman I'd never met. Because of you, I didn't send the money. I smiled in the dark, knowing the fight had changed shape again. Tomorrow I would speak under oath, and the truth would travel farther than I ever had. The room where I gave my sworn statement was smaller than I imagined. No grand flags, no dramatic lighting, just a table, a recorder, and 2 investigators who spoke softly and listened like every word mattered. I raised my right hand and promised to tell the truth, and something in me settled. I had been doing that all along anyway. They asked me to start from the beginning, not just the transfer, but the trust, how my cousin framed the opportunity, how urgency was used like a lever, how love blurred my instincts. I spoke slowly, carefully, because this wasn't a performance, this was a record. Dates came easily now. Numbers too. Trauma scrambles memory, but repetition sharpens it. I had rehearsed this story not to dramatize it, but to survive it. When they asked how the loss affected me, my voice shifted. I told them about sleeping in my car, about rationing food, about the way shame makes you disappear before hunger ever does. One investigator paused the recorder and offered water. I took it, grateful but steady. I wasn't breaking, I was naming. They thanked me when it was over. That surprised me more than it should have. As I left the building, sunlight hit my face, and I realized I felt lighter. Not relieved exactly, but unburdened. I had carried this truth long enough. Now it belonged to the record. Life moved forward, even as the case deepened. Subpoenas expanded. More victims came forward. The nonprofit became busier than ever, not because of publicity, but because people trusted it. Trust felt sacred now. I protected it fiercely. We created intake forms, verification protocols, clear boundaries. No one would ever confuse our mission with a promise of profit. I finally upgraded from my rented room to a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy, clean lines, quiet mornings. The first night there, I slept stretched out, not curled up defensively. That alone felt like a victory. My cousin didn't reach out again. I heard through others that her accounts were frozen, her movements restricted. I didn't celebrate. I grieved. Grieved the version of us that had existed before money entered the room. But grief didn't pull me backward anymore. It walked beside me, manageable. One afternoon, as I was reviewing workshop feedback, an email came in from the investigators. Subject line, status update. I opened it slowly. They thanked me again for my cooperation and informed me that formal charges were being prepared, not just for my cousin, but for a broader network connected to similar schemes. My documentation had helped establish a pattern. I closed my eyes and let that land. This hadn't just been about me. It never was. That evening, I stood at my window watching cars move below, lights blinking like a pulse. I thought about the woman I'd been at the beginning of this, trusting, hopeful, unguarded. I didn't judge her. I honored her. She believed in possibility. I still did. I just believed in proof now, too. The nonprofit board approved our next phase, national curriculum, partnerships with libraries and community centers, a hotline for scam prevention. I signed the papers with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. Responsibility does that. It reminds you that purpose is work. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. A message from Legal Aid waited at the top of my inbox. Short, direct. The court has scheduled the final hearing. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart steady, knowing this chapter was almost complete. But endings, I'd learned, are just beginnings with better lighting. The final hearing date circled itself in my mind long before it appeared on paper. I didn't feel dread. I felt gravity, the kind that pulls you into presence whether you're ready or not. This wasn't about winning. It was about closing a door that had stayed open long enough to let the cold in. I prepared the way I'd learned to prepare for everything now, methodically. I reviewed statements, reread timelines, practiced answering questions without flinching. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because the truth deserved clarity. At night, in my quiet studio, I laid my clothes out with care. Neutral colors, nothing loud, nothing apologetic, just me, exactly as I was. The nonprofit work didn't slow down. If anything, it intensified. We launched the hotline quietly, expecting a trickle. It rang within minutes. Women whispered, men hesitated. People asked questions they'd never felt safe asking before. How do I check if this is real? What if it's my brother? What if I already sent the money? I answered when I could. When I couldn't, trained volunteers did. Systems mattered now. I refused to let burnout take another thing from me. Family dynamics shifted in subtle ways. Some relatives who had gone silent months earlier started sending cautious messages. Hope you're okay. Thinking of you. I didn't read too much into it. Healing doesn't require reunions. It requires honesty. I stayed polite, distant, open to what was real, not what was convenient. The night before the hearing, sleep didn't come easily. Not from fear, more from reflection. I thought about how close I'd come to disappearing into shame, how sleeping in my car had taught me which parts of myself were unbreakable, how documentation had saved me when belief had failed. I realized I trusted myself now in a way I never had before. That trust was the real recovery. At the courthouse, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. My cousin sat across the room, shoulders tense, eyes down. I felt a flicker of sadness, not for what was happening, but for what never would, the version of us that might have been honest. That grief passed quickly. I didn't let it take the wheel. The hearing moved briskly, evidence summarized, references cited. The judge spoke carefully, choosing words that would last longer than the room. He acknowledged the pattern, the intent, the harm. When he spoke about accountability, my breath caught, not because it was harsh, but because it was clear. Clarity is a kind of mercy when you've lived in confusion. No dramatic outburst followed, no collapse, just decisions recorded and consequences set in motion. Restitution ordered where possible, referrals made, records sealed where appropriate. The law did what it could do. It didn't give me back time, it didn't restore trust, but it named the truth and wrote it down where it couldn't be erased. Outside, reporters waited again, fewer this time. I declined interviews. My work didn't need commentary, it needed continuity. I walked away into daylight that felt earned, phone buzzing with messages from the board, from volunteers, from women's names I knew only through stories. That evening, I returned home and cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, let my shoulders drop. The fight, at least this part of it, was over. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. Then my email chimed. A subject line from the federal investigators I hadn't expected to see so soon. Next phase, advisory role, invitation. I stared at the screen, understanding instantly that the end I'd braced for wasn't an ending at all. It was a doorway, and I had to decide whether to walk through it. I didn't open the email right away. I let it sit there on the screen while I rinsed my plate, wiped down the counter, and put the kettle on for tea. Old habits, maybe. Or instinct. Big decisions deserve a little quiet before you touch them. When I finally sat down and opened it, the language was careful but clear. The federal team, consumer protection, financial crimes, wanted me in an advisory role. Temporary, structured. My lived experience paired with policy work, education strategy, and victim outreach. Not a face for press conferences, a voice in rooms where decisions were made. I read the message twice, then a third time more slowly. Advisory role meant responsibility. It meant visibility. It meant my story would no longer belong just to me, or even to the women who'd found me online. It would become part of a system. Systems can change lives. They can also grind people down if you let them. I knew that now. I called my nonprofit board first. I didn't ask for permission. I asked for perspective. They listened, asked good questions, talked about capacity, boundaries, mission alignment. One woman said something that stuck. You don't have to carry this alone just because you survived it alone. That sentence loosened something in my chest. I slept on it. Actually slept. Deep, uninterrupted sleep that felt like my body exhaling months of tension at once. The next morning, I said yes. The weeks that followed felt unreal in the best and hardest ways. Meetings with people who spoke in acronyms, drafts of educational frameworks, conversations about how scammers exploit trust, culture, family obligation. I watched professionals nod when I described things I'd lived through, the urgency scripts, the fake scarcity, the way shame keeps victims quiet. Seeing my pain translated into prevention felt like alchemy. My cousin's case faded into the background. Restitution trickled in, incomplete but real. I didn't track it obsessively. I let the law do its work and focused on mine. Healing, I'd learned, doesn't mean staying emotionally tied to the outcome. The nonprofit crossed another milestone, official national status, grants approved, partnerships signed. We trained facilitators in cities I'd never visited. Libraries, churches, community centers became classrooms. I watched women walk in guarded and walk out lighter, armed with questions instead of fear. That mattered more than any headline. Family relations remained complicated. My mother called one evening, voice softer than it had been in a long time. She didn't defend my cousin. She didn't ask me to fix anything. She just said she was proud of me. I let myself sit with that, accepting it without needing more. Some nights, old memories still surfaced. The parking garage lights, the hum of my car engine, the way I used to whisper plans into the dark so I wouldn't forget who I was. Those memories didn't hurt the way they used to. They felt like markers on a map, proof of distance traveled. One afternoon, after a long advisory call, I stood at my window and realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't driven by anger anymore, not even by justice. I was driven by clarity, by the knowledge that my voice could interrupt harm before it started. Before bed, I checked my email one last time. A message from a woman in another state caught my eye. I left the meeting today and canceled the transfer, she wrote. I trusted my gut because of you. I closed my laptop and smiled, knowing the story had come full circle. Tomorrow, I would speak at our largest workshop yet, and for the first time, I wouldn't be telling it as a warning born from loss. I'd be telling it as proof that survival, when paired with truth, can become purpose. Standing at the front of that room, looking out at hundreds of faces, some hopeful, some guarded, some exhausted in ways I recognized immediately, I understood something that had taken me a long time to learn. Survival isn't loud. It doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to disappear when disappearing feels easier. I told them my story from the beginning. Not polished, not softened. I talked about trusting family because trust had been my first language, about how scams don't always come from strangers. They come from people who know your childhood, your fears, your dreams. I talked about wiring money with shaking hands and convincing myself love was enough protection. Heads nodded, eyes filled. No one rushed me. I told them about sleeping in my car, about learning which parking lots felt safest, about brushing my teeth in gym bathrooms while pretending everything was fine. I didn't rush past the shame. I named it, because shame loses power when it's spoken aloud. Then I talked about the turning point, not the court dates, not the investigations, but the moment I decided to document instead of disappear, the moment I chose truth over comfort, the moment I realized my voice, even when it shook, was stronger than silence. That was where the room shifted. You could feel it, like a collective breath being released. I explained the practical things too, verification steps, red flags, questions to ask even when it feels awkward, especially when it feels awkward. I reminded them that love doesn't require blind trust, and family doesn't get automatic access to your finances just because they share your blood. Boundaries aren't betrayal, they're protection. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, sustained, the kind that feels like acknowledgement, not entertainment. Women lined up afterward, not for photos, but for conversation, to ask questions, to say me too, to say not again. That mattered more than anything. Later that evening, back in my quiet apartment, I made tea and sat by the window watching the city move without me. I thought about how close I'd come to losing myself to shame and silence, how easily this story could have ended in a parking lot with no witnesses. Instead, it had turned into a blueprint for me, for others. The scam took my savings, it took my comfort, it took my certainty, but it didn't take my will, and that turned out to be the one thing worth protecting at all costs. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.